The Cincinnati Bengals kicked off minicamp on Tuesday, and Joe Burrow is back at practice and throwing. Let's break down his participation in minicamp practice and what he had to say afterwards, talking to the media.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Lisco. He's your host, James Rapine. We're the Locked On Podcast Network here for Locked On Bengals on YouTube, everywhere you get your podcasts. If you're new to the show, you can subscribe on YouTube, and makes it really easy to become an everydayer to make us your first listen. And shout outs to all of you who have made us a part of your daily routine with either or both of those two habits so far. Today's episode is sponsored by Game Time. You can save $20 off your first purchase of tickets right now on the Game Time app with promo code Locked On NFL, one word, all caps. And James, Joe Burrow is back. He was out there for practice. We'll talk about what he did, but he also had a 19-minute press conference with you and other members of the Bengals local media, Bengals Beat. Talked a lot about his mentality and how he's approaching coming back from this wrist injury, goes back to that calf injury last year at this time of year, and aligns quite a bit with what we've been saying about how he's been approaching this offseason.
Yeah, it does. And look, it's no shock that he was going to dial it back a little bit this offseason. He's been very clear about that. But I think one thing I noticed, and I haven't went back and listened, I was obviously in there, but I haven't went back and listened to the entire 19 minutes yet. I'm going to, of course, because let's be honest, it's Locked On Bengals or Locked On Burrow, whatever you want to say when it's LOB. But everything he says matters. But I thought he was pretty calculated with how he was answering things, was really trying to give as much honesty as he could, at the same time not wanting to give away anything, and there's the delicate balance there on his side. But yeah, he's I think learning to play it safe is the wrong word, but it's like the word that we would use at the water cooler, to play it safe. This isn't the time to push it, and I think he knows that and has been very clear about that. The Bengals know that, and when we get into our practice takeaways later, I think that the actions back up the words, which is always something that you're curious about when it comes to that. Does he say one thing and then go out there and do another? And at least on Tuesday, that wasn't the case.
Yeah, there are three major themes to me when you talk about what Burrow said with the beat. And then there's some specific things that I think were very interesting that we can talk about as well, like some football specific things. But from a Joe Burrow talking about himself perspective, the major themes were, one, I think he's generally pretty optimistic for 2024. There is some caution right now, and we're going to talk about, not pushing it and what he did in practice and all these things. And that was a theme as well, that there is some caution right now. But he said he's going to be ready for the season. He said he feels really good about the way he's throwing right now. He feels really good about the work he's put in over the last 10 years, he said, to get to the point he's at and be the quarterback he is. And the emphasis then is, well, I need to have my body ready for all these things that I know I can do. And so with that in mind, another theme is, like you said, not pushing it so hard. The calf injury last year forced or was the catalyst for a mindset adjustment. And he even went so far as to say he would have handled that calf injury differently last year today if it were to happen again. I thought also he was just generally, as you said, yes, calculated, but as honest as he could be. I thought his answers about the challenges of coming back from the injury and how it's up and down and it's not linear. Like quarterback growth isn't linear. Well, injury recovery isn't always linear. It's not always today is better than yesterday. Over time, that's the trend. That's the way injury recovery works. But I thought that the big themes there were optimism generally, caution and the mindset change coming from the calf last year and coming off this wrist injury. And I thought the answers about the up and down nature of coming back from this injury were interesting and revelatory.
For sure. And you're right, because especially after last week where I mean, you want to talk about the speculation or what we knew and all of those things in between. We knew he didn't practice one of the days. And Zach led us on one way, or maybe he didn't. And maybe Joe was dealing with extra soreness. We don't know. But you're right. It isn't. You don't just level up. This isn't Pokemon where you go from level 10 to level 11. At some point, there's going to be not even a setback, because I don't even think that's the word. But when you're coming back from something else is going to ache, just like anything, or something else is going to be bothering you, or there's going to be little things that you have to deal with. And I think that's part of it. That's part of this process, where I'm sure Burrow wanted to go out there today and just throw BBs all over and show everyone that he's the best he's ever been. And maybe he's still capable of doing that today. At the same time, I think that this is, and last week is about making sure that they keep the merchandise, keep the priorities in order.
Mm-hmm.
It's June, right? It is June, and you can't win a Super Bowl in June. You can lose a Super Bowl in June, potentially, if you mismanage things. You could argue that the Bengals lost the Super Bowl in July last year. I think that's probably what goes on through Joe's mind, because when you mention the calf, I think a lot of people think, oh, well, yeah, he probably shouldn't have played against Cleveland, and they go all the way to September. No, I think Joe thinks about that July 27th practice, coming in July 28th, having a little tightness, and not just practicing through it with the sleeve, but like practicing through it hard for 2+ hours in the heat, running, pivoting, stopping, all of the things that he did. And so, yeah, maybe just dial it back a little bit. And I think that's what we've seen thus far. And hopefully it continues, because it's all about getting 9 to September fully healthy.
Yeah, practicing hard, even in a practice that was designed not to be a terribly hard practice for him. Another thing that really stood out when talking about the earnestness and the introspection that Joe Burrow has gone through around these injuries, and several have quoted this and tweeted this quote, and it's obviously in the presser, which you, I'm sure, can view online at this point. Olivia Ray tweeted this, though, and I saw her put the quote together first. Whenever the injuries start to stack up, your football mortality kind of comes to mind. It's always a balancing act. That's what this offseason has been about for me. This is Joe Burrow talking. It's not pushing through some of the things I have in the past, and that's, the calf, the abdominal soreness preceding the major appendix surgery, the open appendectomy that he had to have a few years ago. It's stuff like that where he's going through this mindset change of the hard work or the intensity isn't what's driving me forward now. And like I referred to earlier, the 10 years of work he's done to get to this point is work that isn't going anywhere. And so his priority right now of getting through the little break between now and late July when training camp starts is going about his workouts in a smart way, managing his rest in a smart way. And this is stuff that he talked about in his presser as well. He said, we're going to get the work in, we're just going to be smart about it, essentially. And so he's got his plan between now and late July set already, but the emphasis on being smart about it, I thought, was interesting.
Well, and there's 2 things there. You talk about the 10 years, and that's basically going back to post high school for Joe. And so that's what he's thinking, is when he became an Ohio State Buckeye and the trek and the path to now. And he missed those 3 years where he's just working and didn't get on the field. And so, of course, he doesn't want to come off the field. And in his head, that mindset is what got him to Heisman Trophy winning Joe Burrow, number 1 pick. And so when you think of it that way, it makes a ton of sense. And the appendix is certainly something that is a factor, all these little injuries and things. But yeah, the calf is the one that you look at now, and I think he looks at. And when you combine that with, I'm sure he, even though they're completely unrelated, says, oh man, well, I probably wouldn't have had to deal with the wrist. I wouldn't have had that unluckiness if my calf had been healthy for the entire season. And who knows? Maybe he doesn't feel that way. But the point is you don't want to have to be playing nicked up all year long if you can avoid it, and maturing and growing and realizing the work that he's put in and how everything changes if he's not on the field, which he's not superhuman. So there are things that could happen. So let's continue. I think there's more here. Let's continue with more Joe Burrow takeaways coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the app you need to download right now. And whether it's getting NBA Finals tickets or getting tickets to your next live event, maybe an event if you're watching on YouTube here at Paycor Stadium in, say, September when the Bengals take on the Patriots, Game Time has killer last-minute deals, all in prices, views from your seat, panoramic views, so you know exactly what type of seat and what kind of view you're going to get with that ticket. And they also have a lowest price guarantee. They take the guesswork out of buying tickets from the NBA Finals to NFL games to concerts, which there are going to be concerts throughout downtown here in Cincinnati all summer long. So check out the Game Time app today and take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. That's LOCKEDON NFL. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
James, there were a few other Joe Burrow quotes that I think were very interesting in this presser. One that goes directly to the last point you made was about his value to the organization. And he talked about that specifically as well, and understanding that he is an engine for this team. And that's part of the formula that we've talked about, where there are all these incidents and occurrences that have happened through his NFL career, and even going back to his college days, that have led to various injuries having significant impacts for his own career or his team's success, and helping to highlight even further the importance of getting his body right. In addition to that, I think there were a couple of really interesting quotes about football related stuff, getting off of the Joe Burrow maturing process and, listening to his body stuff that we've talked about so much over the last month. It feels like a couple things stood out from a football perspective. The most fun to me was he was asked about what kind of defensive looks he thinks the Bengals are going to see this year. They saw a lot of the same sort of stuff last year, trying to limit the explosive play, blah, blah, blah. And Burrow, I was expecting kind of a nothing answer here, but this is the most fun part of the presser to me. Burrow said he thinks the offense will dictate more this year. He talks about he's expecting to see more varied looks from opposing defenses, but he thinks that the way they're approaching offense this year is such that it will dictate how opposing defenses have to answer them from a personnel perspective, from a stylistic change perspective, and from a specifically, he mentioned eye candy before the snap perspective. And these are things that we've been talking about this offense potentially standing to benefit from, that they haven't incorporated as much as they could over the last few years.
Yeah, the eye candy. Who doesn't like a little eye candy, right? And I think adding that into the mix, him saying that, it lines up with how we kind of view the personnel when you think of it that way. When you think about Mike Gesicki joining this team, when you think of re-signing Tanner Hudson, bringing back Drew Sample in the tight end room, drafting 2 other tight ends, and then at the same time, you do feel like they're more versatile in the backfield than they've been in the past with a Chase Brown and Zach Moss, guys that complement their offense a bit more. And you think losing Tyler Boyd, but now you have multiple guys that could fill that role. They're more multiple, more versatile. And so it does line up with what we thought could be the case. And I think that is their vision. And it's exciting because their offense is their offense. He also said that part of it. And their base offense is their offense. And I think when the game's on the line, we know what it's going to look like to a large degree. At the same time, adding these wrinkles is something they need to do. They need defensive coordinators to have to stay up a little later at night to try to figure their offense out and figure out all the little wrinkles, because they're too talented. Joe Burrow's too smart. He's too intelligent of a player. Jamar Chase, same thing. He could play anywhere. You could literally put Jamar Chase on the field at all times if you needed to. And so defense too is my point there. Like, that's how talented he is. So don't get any ideas, Lou. But the point is take advantage of that versatility and try to maximize this offense. And hopefully they're able to do that.
And they can still be their base offense while doing these things, while being more personnel versatile, while moving Jamar Chase into the slot more, while serving up more eye candy for defenses, for linebackers, for safeties before the snap, even for defensive linemen to some degree. They can do all those things and remain their core offense, the offense that is their base offense that they've built around Joe Burrow, that is not going to change anytime soon. And with the ability to be more personnel diverse or see how teams are responding to some of their tight ends that are really big receivers or two tight end sets or moving Jamar Chase into the slot. These are all things that can help them from a strategic advantage, from a schematic perspective on offense. And that sounds fun to me. If they come through with these ideas and you know, the under center play action part of the game and all this stuff. Like one of the few clips we saw from the walkthrough part of practice, one of the few Jamar Chase clips out there from practice was I think he was in jet motion. They throw a screen to him. Nothing revolutionary there, but it's motion at the snap and it's using Jamar Chase in a creative way, right? And so, like I said, nothing crazy with that idea, but one way that they can continue to use Jamar Chase, the way they've used Jamar Chase and screens, getting him the ball quickly on the perimeter, letting him make plays with the ball in his hands, and incorporating some of these ideas like eye candy along with it. It doesn't need to be crazy, but it's just a small observation from one practice clip that aligns with what Joe Burrow is talking about here.
Yeah, I think they've been so smart to always be able to adjust to defenses and figure out the answers to questions. But it's time to, you know, and figure out the riddles or whatever to get a good grade on the test. All right, we'll keep this school theme going. Hand out your own test. Make these defenses have to answer different things. And they should just have so many tricks in their bag. And I think for one reason or another, and they tried to do this last year, to be very clear. It's not like they weren't trying to do this. This isn't like Dan Pitcher just comes in and he's the only one, even though I think he's certainly a factor and was a factor in it last year. But I think it goes back to the calf. It goes back to everything that they were dealing with. I think that losing Boyd and Mixon is tough, but I also think that they feel really good about who they brought into from a fit standpoint. And that isn't just two guys. It's a bunch of guys that I could rattle off. So I think all of these things go hand in hand where now they know they have to do it. The personnel matches it, and they can just go and hopefully find as many answers to the test and give out as many tests to these opposing defenses as possible. How about that for a bad school analogy that died somewhere as people walk by me here at Paycor?
Yeah, but you stuck to it. And you know, you push through. We don't want you to do that. We want you to follow Joe Burrow's model here. And when things get rough, they don't feel so good, you take a break, but you got through it, and that's what matters. The other quote,
I'm not hitting a pause button, Jake. That's not happening. We aren't pausing nothing. We just keep rolling through it. We power through.
The other quote that I wanted to bring attention to that I thought was interesting is Jamar Chase and T. Higgins obviously were not present. Jamar Chase there today for minicamp, but up until this point in the offseason program, haven't seen those guys. And Joe Burrow went out of his way, I think, to specifically praise Andre Yosevach, Trent Norman, and Shedrick Jackson, who have been getting some reps with those outside receiver spots. And I think perhaps those guys specifically, because you're talking about them doing what Jamar and T would normally be doing in practice, if you're wondering where Charlie Jones is on that list, or maybe these guys have just been more impressive than Charlie Jones. But I did think it was interesting that those guys got individual praise from Joe Burrow. And we know that he's always kind of had that trust and respect for Trent Irwin, but he said they've had really strong off seasons. But hearing that about Yosevach and Shedrick Jackson, a couple of second-year players, and Jackson, a practice squad player last year, particularly interesting. Yoshi potentially forcing his way onto the field, right? If he has taken that step and he's having a really good offseason and he's just ahead of schedule from a developmental perspective, just forces himself onto the field, and maybe that is Jamar Chase moving into the slot more to facilitate that, as Yosevach previously said that he wasn't really in that race. I thought that was a particularly interesting snippet from Joe Burrow's presser about his receivers.
He's bigger. I'll say this. First off, we already know he's an elite athlete. He's bigger than he was last year. He clearly hit the weight room. He's got the right mindset. We know he's intelligent. Like, there's a lot to like. And we know he has Burrow's trust in the red zone. And so, yeah, I think there will be a role for Andre Yosevach. And there's a lot to like. I think he just checks all the boxes, made of the right stuff, hard work ethic. He's clearly put in the work this offseason on his own. Clearly has the right attitude, mindset, has the football intelligence. Like, check. Those are guys you bet on. And I think that's why they were high on him when they picked him. He blew them away as a rookie from where he was at training camp versus where they kind of expected him on draft night. And yeah, I expect him to contribute a lot this year.
Let's finish up the show today with some practice observations. Jamar Chase mentioned he's back. Trent Brown also back. Let's talk about those guys' participation, what Joe Burrow did and didn't do in practice on Tuesday to finish the show coming up next.
You mentioned it, Jake. Jamar back, and it's good to see. It's always obviously good to see Jamar Chase on the football field. Didn't do a ton on Tuesday, which is fine. It was he did everything but team, to be clear. And it's not like team was super heavy. It's just 7-on-7, but didn't participate in that. But was on the field, caught passes from Joe Burrow, and need we say more? That's all I think people wanted to see, and he was out there.
Yeah, I don't think that there's any real concern over Jamar Chase's participation in minicamp in June. We'll get him out there for training camp. We'll see if he maybe does a little bit more tomorrow on Wednesday.
Maybe.
I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't. I wouldn't be surprised if he does. I don't think it's terribly important. Also back in practice was Trent Brown. James, you mentioned Amarius Mims and Trent Brown working before we started recording. You mentioned this to me, working in a rotation a little bit, and we saw a little bit of extra tackle Amarius Mims beside Trent Brown, which I'm sure was a sight to behold because Trent Brown looks comically large.
Do you think they're big enough? Like
in general?
I think they may be too little to not. I'm joking. Like, oh my God. Like can you imagine that? Like if that's what your role, you want to talk about multiple. That's your extra tackle is this elite athlete, probably the best athlete they have in the offensive line room. 6'8" looks like it is funny how different they look. And Trent Brown, obviously, it's great having him here. And I do think it matters. And I think even for a few days, just to get some reps is good. At the same time, you're going to talk about health management and all those things with Burrow. It's the same thing with Trent. Like I'm okay with the splitting the reps and doing all that. And hopefully they do that in training camp too, to keep 77 healthy and keep him fresh, because Amarius Mims can use those reps. And we know what Trent Brown's going to be if he's healthy. So keeping him healthy, getting him to week 1 healthy is certainly good, but it's good to get those reps for Amarius too, because we know he's the future, and who knows, maybe at some point this year he could be the present.
Seeing those guys side by side, man, I'm excited to see it on a football field, like in a game for the first time. It's going to be just a spectacle in a lot of ways. They're so big. It's hilarious.
It's wild. It really is, because it's and they are in, obviously Orlando Brown Jr. is in that same category. They are all different, even though they're towers. They're all built different. They all move different. They all have different strengths. And so it's good though. And hopefully they can keep 9 upright. You mentioned practice observations. And so, yeah, let's get to, I'm trying to think of nothing really stood out outside of that, of Amarius Mims being the extra tackle alongside Trent Brown at times. Offensive line wise, obviously not much is going to stand out. Joe Burrow, this did seem like more of one of the lighter days where he wasn't trying to zip it. He didn't. I think his longest throw downfield was probably 20 yards, 25 yards. Completed passes to Shedrick Jackson in 11s. Completed a pass to, I want to say,
7s. You
or in
said
7s.
11s?
Yeah, no 7s, no 11s. I want to say, was it? I think it was Kendrick Pryor on the sideline. I'm thinking of the numbers. I'm pretty sure it was 19 on the sideline that he completed a ball to too. So it spreading the ball out to guys that we wouldn't necessarily anticipate Joe throwing to. And so take that into consideration too when you're thinking about what at least Tuesday was minicamp wise. We'll see what it looks like on Wednesday, but it's not like he was he also completed a pass to Gesicki, but it's not like he was throwing 8 passes to Jamar. Jamar wasn't out there for 7s. Obviously T isn't here. And after that, it's just kind of a rotation of different guys.
When you say it was kind of a lower workload day or lighter day for Burrow, was it the same when Burrow was a quarterback versus the other quarterbacks out there? Were they doing the same sorts of things, or were there differences?
There was differences, and there were differences with Jake Browning. Jake Browning's first rep was a deep ball. to shoot. Oh no, it's Kwame Lassiter, 18. I have photographic memory, ladies and
there it
gentlemen.
is.
I apologize.
Just not of
But
the roster.
Kwame Lassiter. No, I was trying to think of the number.
Oh, okay.
Of like which play. I knew Lassiter's 18. It wasn't the name. It really was the number. I was trying to think. And then he completed one to I'm forgetting his name now. Undrafted free agent, number 17. So there we go.
Cole Burgess?
Yeah, Burgess. Browning completed a deep ball to Burgess.
That's
and
fun.
It was a crazy catch because it was actually a big hit. There was a collision and he lost his helmet, was able to hold on to the ball. It was a heck of a grab. So no, Jake Browning was pushing the ball down the field a bit more, but it wasn't like it maybe it was by design to get the corners work or whatever it was, but it wasn't like it was Browning's rotating with Burrow and he's throwing it deep to the same guys that Burrow's working with. So I don't know what the plan was there. And maybe it was just Burrow's reads too in sevens, that's where it went. So I don't want to alarm people there, but yeah, he did not push the ball down the field the way Jake did.
Just an interesting little note. Might mean nothing. Like we've talked about throughout this podcast so far, we don't really care in June. Just an interesting observation nonetheless to see how they're using these quarterbacks and what kind of work they're getting here in the offseason program. The only other thing that probably bears mentioning is, as we've seen throughout the offseason program so far, Dax Hill and DJ Turner continue their outside cornerback battle. James, anything else that stands out that's worth mentioning here as we get to the end of the Bengals offseason program?
No, I think it's a true battle there. And I think Dax is going to have every chance to win it. And we'll see if he can. Obviously, DJ Turner, I would still give, if I had to name a favorite, he played it last year. And so I think he is the favorite, and that's something Dax would have to win from him. But I think it is up for grabs. And you're talking about two high picks, two guys the Bengals value, two guys that are going to have to contribute regardless this year at cornerback. I think that's pretty safe to say, no matter what happens in that room, including signing a free agent. So we'll see. But both guys, we know DJ Turner's smooth. We know Dax is an elite athlete, and I think he's getting more and more comfortable at cornerback each and every day. It would be nice if we could get him against Jamar Chase. Plenty of time for that, but obviously working against Jamar Chase makes everyone better. Yeah,
we'll see that in training camp at the very least. I guess last note is Joe Burrow officially not on the cover of Madden, as was speculated between our last recording and today. James, did you buy into the hype?
No. Are you happy, sad, indifferent about it?
Mostly indifferent, but probably happier than sad. Like the Madden curse still lives in my brain. I think it's been pretty debunked at this point, but it's still there.
It would have felt like odd timing.
Yes.
That's why I never bought into it, is because I don't know Joe, but I think I have an idea of how Joe thinks to a degree. He'd probably laugh me out of the room for saying that, and I think he'd be like, nah, not right now. Like, I really do. I think he would have turned them down. Who knows if they even reached out, but I think he would have said no this time.
Speaking of attention on Joe Burrow, remember when like the quarterback series was supposedly going to, what happened with that? Nothing.
He clearly was never doing that. And that series, I think, changed to a wide receiver series because wide receivers like the attention more.
Yeah. I will admit that for the Madden cover thing, I listened to the audio. I didn't realize there was audio at first. So I went and listened to the audio. And it didn't sound like Joe to me. And then I went and listened to a Christian McCaffrey interview. It sounded a lot like Christian McCaffrey. And it was Christian McCaffrey in the end. So there you go.
Best running back in the game.
The voice analysts out there. Yeah.
Yeah. You know who I would have went with?
Player of the year, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Who would you have gone with?
It would make Bengals fans mad. Tune in next time. How about that for a cliffhanger?
We're cliffhanging who you would have put on the
No,
Madden
I'm just
cover?
never. I don't think I'll ever tell anyone.
Oh, okay. Maybe you'll find out in a future episode of Locked On Bengals who James would have put on the cover of Madden 25. Not the other Madden 25, but Madden 2025, because there was previously a Madden 25 in like 2010 or something because it was the
Yeah,
25th year of
the
Madden.
25th year. Look at you
Yeah.
confusing people. Yeah, that was.
That's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. We've got more minicamp observations for you for Wednesday's practice in our next episode. Until then, thanks for listening to this episode of Locked On Bengals. Hoo day, and have a good one.